everybody. Welcome to the Difaba podcast, where we talk about children and their development and behavior and how to best support them as they go about this journey of life. I'm your host, Dr. Lilian Kerubu, a pediatrician and behavior enthusiast. And this season, we've been talking about disabilities and how these disabilities affect the development and the behavior of a child, and how we as a community can come together to support this child so that they can have the best experience out of life. This week, we are going to talk about another mental disability. Last week, we talked about schizophrenia, and this week, we're going to talk about anxiety. So, what is anxiety? Anxiety basically means prolonged or uncontrollable fear, worry, or panic. We all have fears, we all have concerning thoughts, we all have things we worry about, and we all have things that we panic about. However, when it becomes uncontrollable based on your age and the degree of development, then becomes anxiety, and it can be quite disabling because when you're anxious, when you're very anxious and you cannot control those feelings of anxiety, most of the time you will not be able to perform your regular activities. Let's say you were supposed to go to school, but because you're afraid of the road that needs to be crossed, or you're afraid of the teacher, or you're afraid of meeting new people, then you won't go to school, and that affects your learning, that affects your growth, and your economic activities later on. And so that has become the anxiety has now become a disability. If you're not able to go to work because you worry that you will not perform well at work, then anxiety has become a disability. If you're not able to have regular, nourishing relationships with your family and your friends because you are afraid of being judged, or you're afraid of what they're going to say about you, then anxiety has become a disability. And this is very common in children, because children start life with no fear, literally, and then they start experiencing painful scenarios or dangerous scenarios, or they hear stories of what is dangerous, and then now they start becoming afraid. And if they're not regulated, if they don't have the autonomy to know when to stop the fear, then the fear can overwhelm them and become a disability. And so that's why it's important to learn about anxiety in children and how it manifests. So most commonly, anxiety affects girls, but even boys are known to have anxiety, and it can be picked from children from as young as 3 years of age. So how can you suspect that your child may be having anxiety? What is it that we need to look out for when we have children growing, and when do we need to say that perhaps this child has anxiety? One of the commonest things that anxious children do is that they become irritable, and they become easily annoyed by situations that may not be as annoying or as irritating as they warrant. So, for example, if a child has gone to play in the playground, and then you know how kids are, some of them do not know how to ask for toys. Maybe the child has toys, and then another child comes and starts playing with their toys. So this child becomes very irritable and very annoyed, extremely annoyed beyond what we consider normal for the age. This could be a clue that this child has anxiety. The child may become very clingy to the parent or the guardian, to the extent that they do not want to be separated from the parent, despite perhaps an age above 3 years. If a child is 3-4 years and they are still super clingy to their parent or guardian, it could be a clue that this child has anxiety. If the child has night terrors or nightmares, and it's difficult to wean them off from the parental or guardian bed, this could be a clue that the child has anxiety. If the child has frequent tummy aches, you go to the hospital, tests are done, and the tests are negative. The child is given medication, but nothing seems to help, and this keeps repeating. It could be a clue that this child has anxiety. If the child has hyperventilation, and this is very common in teenagers and adolescents, if they hyperventilate, breathe deeply and faster than usual, this could be a symptom of anxiety. Also, if they are obsessed with thoughts about what might happen in like they're obsessed with death, or what happens when somebody dies, or what happens when somebody's hand is cut off. They're obsessed about scary stuff. It could be a clue that they're trying to gain control of the scary stuff. That's why they keep obsessing over it and thinking about it and talking about it all the time. If they're easily startled, you just come into the room and the child screams out of fear, that could be a clue that this child is anxious. Or if they have specific phobias, most people are afraid of something. Either it could be a bug, it could be loud noises, it could be a snake, perhaps. However, we get more and more accustomed to our phobias the more we are exposed to them. But in some children, they don't seem to be able to have the capacity to separate their phobia from their experience, and this could be a clue that these children have anxiety. So how can you help your child who might have anxiety, or who may have already been diagnosed with anxiety? So the first thing to do is to have them checked out by a professional, either a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and we do have child psychologists and child psychiatrists who are able to assess children and be able to give you a diagnosis on whether this child has anxiety or not, and have them assessed also on how this anxiety is affecting and impacting their daily lives. Once the diagnosis has been ascertained, the psychiatrist or the psychologist will give you different therapies that you can do with your child to help them overcome their fear. And one of the things that you can do is to help your child relax, to teach your child relaxation techniques. And this could be in the form of breathing exercises. There are various ways of breathing that help to promote relaxation by bringing down the heart rate, increasing the oxygen supply, and getting rid of the carbon dioxide that may have built up during the anxiety episode. You can also learn about relaxation stretches and relaxation exercises that help to release the tension in the muscles, because most of the time when you have an anxiety episode, your muscles are held in a tensed position. But with certain exercises and stretches, the muscles are able to release that tension. And it's good to do these exercises together with your child so that they can release the tension that they may be holding inside their bodies. Then other thing you can do with your child is to slowly and safely expose them to what it is that they could be anxious about. Remember, I said slowly and safely. So let's say your child is has a phobia for sand, for example, and this is very common with children who are in the spectrum, who have autism spectrum disorder. They may be anxious or afraid about things that are not really are not very scary to the typical person. However, to the neurodiverse child, it may be very terrifying. And this can impact their experience of life. It can impact their learning. It can impact their social interactions. One of the things that I see children in the spectrum struggling with is sand, or Play-Doh, or things basically that need to be manipulated with the hands. And so they end up missing out a lot on creative activities that are happening in class. Perhaps the class is making a mosaic or an art program that requires them to use sand. So the autistic child is often left behind while the rest of the classroom is making the art project. So one of the ways that you can help your child to overcome this fear of sand, because it literally will not do them harm, is to slowly and safely expose them to sand. So you can start with just a grain for 1 minute, and you reward them when they are able to even just touch that grain of sand, and then slowly increase the amount of sand that they're exposed to, and keep rewarding them every time they interact with the sand, until we are finally able to graduate them to a full experience with sand. This can be done by a professional in case as a parent you feel frustrated or you don't know how to go about it. There are professionals out there known as occupational therapists who can help your child to overcome certain types of fears that may be holding them back from having a full learning experience in the environments that they find themselves in. as a parent or a guardian, more often than not, children mirror our feelings and mirror our experiences. So it's not a surprise to find a child who is anxious because they have seen their parent being anxious in certain situations. So it's important as parents and guardians that we become role models of how to manage our fears and our anxieties, and have our children observe that in us so that they can model the behavior that we would like to see in them. So if you have anxiety, let's say you have anxiety over insects, for example, it's good for your children to see you trying to manage that anxiety, maybe by taking breathing exercises every time you see an insect, or learning how to overcome your fears, so that the children can be comforted and they can see that it is possible to overcome their fears. It's also important to prepare your children prior to an experience that may be anxious for them. This is especially helpful if you have a child in the spectrum, because they're usually anxious when it comes to traveling. They're anxious when it comes to meeting new people, going to a birthday party, going to an event that has a lot of stimuli like fireworks, loud noises, clowns, kids running up and down. It's a very anxiety inducing situation for a child, especially in the spectrum. So it's important that you prepare them in advance. You can take pictures of the place and show them to your child before the event. You can help them manage sensory stimulation by blocking out some of the sensation, either by using noise cancelling headphones or sunglasses so that there's not too much light going into their eyes, or basically having them sit in a place that doesn't have too many people running around, so that they are able to regulate their emotions. So thank you so much for joining us for this week. Remember to share this episode with people who you think may benefit from it. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time as we continue to learn about disabilities in children. Bye-bye.